Don't you hate it when a global pandemic causes spring break to come 1 week early? Wait a minute. So now that I have, an insane amount of time on my hands, I thought that I would just crank out a few YouTube videos. And what I'm starting with is something that I've been wanting to do a video on for a long time. So, the Oscars were, it was already like a month or something ago. It was a while ago. And the biggest, arguably the biggest award of the Oscars is the Oscar for Best Picture, which is basically the best movie of the year, and no one else can say, hey, this movie was better. But so what I wanted to do for a while, for 2 or 3 years ago, I wanted to watch all of them, and I've noticed I'm very lazy about watching movies, so that was 2 years ago, and I'm only 12 movies in. So, like I said, I've seen the first 12 movies, and you guessed it, I'm going to rank them. So less chit-chat and more rank. I don't know. In the 30s and 40s, people cranked out these weird generic musicals called the Broadway Melody of whatever date the movie was released. They had a Broadway Melody of 1936, of 1942, you get it. But the Broadway Melody that won Best Picture was from 1929, so obviously the visual quality isn't exactly stellar. The problem I had with this movie is that it's just boring. It's about a love triangle between two sister actors and the director of the musical they're performing. After watching several other Best Picture winners, this movie kind of started to fade away in my mind. There's two things I have against the plotline. Number one, even for a 20s movie, the plotline is numbingly basic, borderline cliche. Number two is that having sisters being in a love triangle complicates the plot because two people competing for the same woman/man probably have to be bitter enemies. For example, one of the girls in this movie couldn't kill the other girl because they're sisters, and in the end of the day, they're close to each other. With all negative things about this movie aside, it's impressive that MGM could make a talkie film in 1929, even that the first talkie film was The Jazz Singer in 1927, only 2 years before. The 30s and the early 40s had so many World War I movies that they started to get old. That's why one of the silver linings to World War II was that production companies had something else they could make movies about. Cavalcade was your average World War I movie, following an American family and how the war affects them. And boy, does it! Practically everyone in the family, except for the women and the children, joined the war, and spoiler alert, most of them die. But it's World War I, what did you expect? Even some of the characters die on the Titanic, or some other sort of cruise liner that also sank. All in all, I found this movie very bland, and this wasn't the first World War I movie to win Best Picture either, so it seemed especially cliche. Probably because there wasn't really anything interesting subplots like there were in other movies on this list. Wings was the first movie to win Best Picture, all the way back in 1927. Well, actually, it was released in 1927, it won in 1928, you get it. After this movie, another silent film wouldn't win Best Picture for 84 years, with The Artist winning in 2011. Wings follows two young men as they join the Air Force in World War I. Another war movie, seriously? And now you'll begin to understand why Wings did everything that Cavalcade didn't. Have an interesting plotline. In my opinion, no movie can be exclusively about a war. That's not a drama, that's just a dramatized documentary. The movie's two main characters, Jack Powell and David Armstrong, are competing for the same woman named Sylvia. Well, actually, David is with the woman that Jack is in love with. Long story short, they go off to war and end up becoming best friends. However, one of Jack's friends, Mary, has feelings for him, and she also joins the war too as a medic. The movie ends with David dying in battle, and instead of taking the opportunity to make a move with Sylvia, he ends up being with Mary, giving the grim movie a cute little twist. This movie was a silent movie. It was 1927 after all. The first talkie film was released only that year. At some points, it was kind of hard to stay focused because of how old the movie is, but it makes up for that in its attention-grabbing and endearing plot. This movie was actually a fresh sight, so I'm actually surprised by how low on the list I put it. The thing is, it was between a Western and another war movie, Cavalcade. This movie takes place in the titular Grand Hotel located in Berlin during World War I, sorry. The main character is Baron Felix von Geigem, a formerly wealthy man who's now resorted to theft and gambling to get money. He teams up with an aging ballerina and a dying accountant against a crooked industrialist and his stenographer. The movie is just under 2 hours, but it feels longer because of the modern set pieces and the engaging storyline. It feels like most of these movies in this era didn't really have modern set pieces, so Grand Hotel was a real breath of fresh air. I know I already said that, but you know. When you have 5 main characters, their subplots tend to collide with each other, and this makes it very interesting and an advanced movie for 1932. However, this movie just wasn't really my thing. If I rated it on a scale of 1 to 10, it would probably be like a 7, and if this video was a best and worst list, this probably would be an honorable mention. What did you expect? A movie that wasn't about war? At least this one finally got it right. It was 1930, and after Wings and the Broadway Melody, there really wasn't anywhere to go but up. It follows a group of German schoolboys as they're pressured by their teacher to join the war effort. What follows is a brutal retelling of World War I, including a large spotlight placed on trench warfare. The movie manages to be action-packed, yet also very disturbing. I remember liking this movie when I first watched it, but the movies in this era kept getting better and better, and eventually this one kept sliding down the list. Honestly, this movie is like a beta Western. In the early 1930s, Western movies weren't super popular because of... Here comes Cimarron, ready to wow us. Actually, up until just a few movies ago, this was one of my favorite Best Picture movies. It's about the Sooners of Oklahoma. One of the people manifesting his destiny is Yancey Cravat, a family man who can do it all. He starts a newspaper company. He's a lawyer. He even deals with crime himself by straight up killing the criminals in the streets. Eventually, he gets restless of living in Osage, Oklahoma, and leaves his family to work on the Cherokee Strip. He kind of betrays his family by doing this, and it didn't help that he also cheated on his wife. At the end of the movie, he dies in a freak accident, because it's a movie. Did he really think at least someone wouldn't die? Honestly, I love this movie, but it's a deal-breaking factor that it's one of the older ones and just seems a little boring in favor of the newer movies of this era. Have you ever had fantasies of living with famous 19th century French painter Paul Cézanne? Well, Emile Zola didn't have to, because he did. The life of Emile Zola is about the life of Emile Zola.
No, really?
Emile Zola is a struggling author that eventually gets his big break writing novels that, let's just say, don't make the French government very happy. The more rich and famous Zola gets, the less he cares about other people, which is pretty bad timing because... who's there?
It's the Dreyfus Affair!
Basically, in 1894, French naval captain Alfred Dreyfus was framed for giving military secrets to Germany. He was exiled to a remote island, and apparently the real perpetrators framed him all because he was Jewish. Well, Dreyfus's wife was smart enough to know that Emile Zola is kind of a wordsmith and figured that he might be able to get her husband out of this mess. Well, he kind of does. He proves his innocence, and not much after that the real criminals either confess their crimes or commit suicide. I like to say that Zola doesn't die at the end like Yancey Cravat does in Cimarron, but hey, it's called The Life of Emile Zola. It kind of has to end with his death. Yeah, apparently people didn't know about carbon monoxide in 1902, and he got a full blast of it one night. I actually really like this movie, and this is the turning point on this list where the movies get, like, really awesome. This movie did pirates before it was cool, and then Disney had to add fantasy to it. Ugh. Clark Gable comes back for round 2, being the only actor in this era to be in 3 Best Picture-winning movies. He plays a sailor on a naval ship, and the captain, well, to put it lightly, the captain is contributing to an extremely toxic workplace. The crew, tired of being abused, forms a mutiny, which is like workers forming a union, or Russians forming a revolution. It sounds like a good idea and will probably help the people who formed it, but it will come back and bite you in the butt. And boy does it! The now triggered captain accuses them of mutiny and almost costs some crew members their heads. And guess what? The captain ends up in jail when the court finds out all about that how he was an abusive leader. Sucks to be him. Overall, it was a good movie, but I don't know. It felt kind of long at some parts, but that's more. Hey, want to watch a 3-hour movie from the 1930s? No. Well, too bad, because if you want to watch all the Best Picture movies, you're going to have to watch many of them. And one of them is The Great Ziegfeld, which follows the career of Florence Ziegfeld Jr., a former carnival barker turned wizard of overcomplicated stage productions with moving sets and extravagant scenery. Every second of the 2-hour and 56-minute film is action-packed, and the amazing stage scenes are partly the reason why it's so high on my list. It definitely wins the award for movie most ahead of its time in this era. Sadly, at the end, the Great Depression hits, and Ziegfeld loses most of his money. Now, what does Florence Ziegfeld, Emile Zola, and Yancey Cravat all have in common? They're all very ambitious men who worked hard to make an impact on the community around them. Oh, and they also die suddenly with no warning at all at the end of their movies. Yep, not even the Great Ziegfeld could stop himself from dying from sadness or something in a rather comfortable armchair. Yeah, it's never really explained how he dies. He just kind of does. Oh boy, here come the pitchforks. Dude, why isn't that number 1? I thought that was like the best movie of all time or something. How do you keep getting into my house? Well, people also say that Citizen Kane is technically the best movie of all time, and that didn't even win Best Picture. Don't get me wrong, Gone with the Wind is a great movie, but is it the best movie? Nope. First of all, it's 3 hours and 58 minutes, already has the disadvantage of being so long to the point that it gets boring. That being said, it's in color, thank goodness, and the plot line is for the most part very interesting and engaging, so it could have felt a lot longer than 4 hours. What I wanted to know was why in 1939 did people think, hey, the economy still sucks and we're in the middle of a depressing war. Let's make a movie reminding us about all the terrible things we did in the Civil War. So basically, this movie is about the Civil War and the 30 or so years following the ending of it, seen through the eyes of Scarlett O'Hara, the most entitled, crazy princess of a character you'll love to hate. She's like if Kelly Kapoor from The Office lived in 1860s Georgia. So Scarlett is mad that the man she loves is marrying his cousin. I mean, she's not mad that he's marrying his cousin, she's mad that he just doesn't love her. Honestly, if I were her, I'd be more concerned about the fact that he's marrying his cousin. It's probably a third cousin or something. But anyways, one very salty Scarlett O'Hara goes back and forth from the married cousin's plantation in Savannah to her own in Atlanta. Or maybe I got those cities mixed up. Enter Rhett Butler, a real fancy son of a gun, and his don't care attitude and her I'm gonna boil your pet rabbit vibes create the most dysfunctional romance of the Confederate South. One dead daughter due to a horseback riding accident who lets their 4-year-old ride a horse anyway, and an awkward love triangle later, and Rhett finally mans up and leaves Scarlett. Well, that was a rather sloppy 4-hour movie summarized in less than 5 minutes. So it was a good movie, and that's normally enough to get pretty high on this list, but the last two were real flicks to consider. Finally, a comedy. I think after 10 years of depressing war movies and biopics that seem to always end in the person dying, we could use a laugh or two. In this film, Jimmy Stewart plays the son of a wealthy businessman that plans to buy out a plot of land that a whole family is living on. What do you think might make this situation even more awkward? The woman Stewart's about to marry lives in that house. Her family is by far the greatest film family of all time. It's filled to the brim with creative and talented people. There are tinkerers in the basement making firecrackers. The patriarch of the household, played by Lionel Barrymore, plays the harmonica. One guy is a xylophone prodigy. There's a ballerina, a painter, cooks. There's even some random Russian guy that all he seems to do is pick people up and throw them around. Wow, this family really has it all, but it can easily be taken away if that old rich dude buys their land out. Now, given that his fiancée lives in that house, Jimmy Stewart isn't just about to let that happen. So what does he do? He decides to invite his parents over to show them how wonderful their family is, so they know who they will be affecting by buying them out. Well, how does that go over? Have you seen the dinner scene in Meet the Parents? It's like that, but now imagine there's like 10 extra Greg Fockers. Yeah, it's a hoot. And guess what? Nobody dies at the end. That's gotta be an extra surprise. You know, each of these movies had at least one little gag that caused a belly laugh, but this movie, I can think of many scenes that were hilarious. So we have a movie that made an impact because it stood out from the rest of the movies. But what if there was one that was both funny, entertaining, and overall a widely agreed upon excellent movie? This is the one. Out of 12 movies, this is the only one that is both a highly entertaining and funny movie, but also one that if you ask someone about some of the best movies of all time, they would probably include this one. Aren't you sick of your parents making you marry who they want you to? So was Ellie. I don't know, she didn't have a last name on IMDb. Ellie decides to run away from her dad so she won't marry some poor guy that all he wants to do is marry into a rich family and then kill his wife to inherit her life insurance money. I don't know, I'm just guessing. Anyways, then there's Peter, who's played by Clark Gable, and we got a Clark Gable bingo. If you had Mutiny on the Bounty, Gone with the Wind, and it happened one night, come on up and get your prize. Peter is a newspaper journalist struggling to find a story to write about, and then he happens to get on the same bus as Ellie. He finally figured out that this was the story he was waiting for, but it turned into way more. They ended up falling in love. Because it's a movie, what did you expect? Even though the road was a little bumpy, sort of literally too. Now listen here, I'm not a huge romance movie person, but let's do some romance movie arithmetic. Now most rom-coms, I'd say, are 50% romance, 50% comedy. And in some severe cases, they're 25% romance and 75% comedy. While romance movies are pure romance, 100%, and garbage like that doesn't like to show its face outside of the Hallmark Channel. I'd give It Happened One Night 1 part's comedy to 3 parts romance, or 25% comedy, 75% romance. That's a lot of romance, and that's normally where I draw the line. But hey, this is the pre-code era. They didn't care about being too insensitive. Overall, this is a very endearing film and very fun to watch. It was emotional, attention-grabbing, and twisting every second so you never truly knew how it ends. In a way, the reason that this movie is number 1 is because, in a sense of the word, it feels more like a modern movie, playing into the rom-com and road trip comedy trope. So there we are, the first 12 Best Picture winning movies ranked. You can be on the lookout for the ranking of the Best Picture winners from the years 1940 to 1949 soon. It might be a while just because I have to watch all of them to begin with. Thanks for watching, and make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Dude, no one asked. Alright, that's it.